Hey guys, tonight we drift gently over ancient waters, where stars flicker above a kingdom built not on land, but on shimmering lakes. Picture this: a city of canals, floating gardens, and temples that rise like stone mountains out of the mist. You're in Tenochtitlan, the jewel of the Aztec Empire, where crops grow on carpets of mud and water, and the horizon smells faintly of wet soil and roasted maize. The air is heavy, damp, and alive with distant flute music, and the occasional croak of something watching from the reeds. Now, you probably wouldn't survive this place for more than an hour. Between the high-altitude sun, the unfamiliar food, and the possibility of being chosen for a ceremonial role, modern life has made you a little too soft for 15th century lake living. But lucky for you, tonight's journey is purely in your mind. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when people are falling asleep to history. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're trudging softly through warm shallows now, your feet slipping a little with each step as soft reeds brush your calves. A few dragonflies buzz lazily overhead. You're in the Valley of Mexico roughly 700 years ago. The sky is bruised with pink and violet streaks, and in the distance, Lake Texcoco stretches wide, its surface glowing like glass under the fading sun. You're not alone here. Canoes cut across the water, paddled by men in simple cotton garments. Their movements so fluid they barely ripple the lake's surface. Birds cry faintly from the marshes, and a breeze carries the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers, stronger than you'd expect. You smell life. You also smell algae, but let's call that atmosphere. Tenochtitlan rises in the near distance, and you stop to admire it. It's hard not to. An entire city, shimmering with movement and reflection. It doesn't just sit by the water, it's cradled inside it. The city is built on a series of small, artificially extended islands connected by canals and causeways, like an ancient grid powered by paddle. You wonder how anyone could build a metropolis in the middle of a lake without drowning it. The short answer? Sheer stubbornness and mud. The long answer, well, you'll get there. But for now, just feel the gentle rock of the canoe as you climb in. A woman with sun-darkened skin nods at you as she pushes off the shore. You're in good hands. You pass under a low arch bridge made of woven branches and baked clay. On either side, chinampas, those famous floating gardens, stretch out like long green rafts, anchored invisibly beneath the water's surface. They're dotted with maize, beans, chili peppers, and rows of flowers in loud, unapologetic colors. You even spot something purple that looks like eggplant, but might also be a spiritual offering. No sudden bites, so probably the former. This isn't some lucky accident of nature. These gardens are engineered, carefully crafted, renewed constantly, and fiercely defended. They feed tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. And if you're thinking, oh cool, hydroponics before hydroponics, you wouldn't be entirely wrong. But the Aztecs would have called it something closer to a gift from the gods, with a little extra manual labor thrown in for fun. A heron flaps lazily overhead. Somewhere far away, a dog barks. Probably a zooloid squintly, one of those hairless little creatures that always look a bit judgmental. You're pretty sure it's barking in Nahuatl. The canoe glides forward, past a man waist-deep in water, pulling weeds from a patch of young amaranth. He doesn't look up, just mutters a small chant under his breath as he works. You hear Tlaloc, the rain god. That guy gets name-dropped a lot around here. Understandable. When your food floats, too much rain isn't just a ruined picnic. It's a total crop wipeout. Historians still argue whether chinampas should be considered floating at all. They were anchored, after all, and often connected to the lakebed with poles or willow trees planted at the corners. Technically, they weren't drifting, but they looked like they were, and maybe more importantly, they felt like they were. When you stood on one, the earth would sink ever so slightly beneath your step, like a sponge soaked with sunlight and water and history. You pass another canoe, this one packed with squash blossoms and flower garlands, bound for a market across the lake. The woman at the back hums a lullaby and doesn't even glance at you. Maybe you're not really here. Maybe you're a ghost drifting through memory, held aloft by scent and story. Your guide murmurs something about xochimilco, moonlight, and you notice the stars beginning to spark into view, one by one, like someone poking holes in a dark cloth. The air grows cooler. Somewhere, a reed flute begins to play, slow and dreamy, notes falling like water drops. By now, the city is closer. You see more causeways, stone platforms, and strange, square buildings jutting from the water like half-sunken cubes. Temples tower in the center, one of them still catching the last gold light. You can almost make out the tiny figures at the top, moving like shadows. Not everything in this world is peaceful, but not everything is war, either. Right now, all you hear is water. As the canoe brushes against a pier made of sun-dried mud bricks, your guide hops out and offers a hand. You step onto the chinampa gently. It gives just a little under your weight like a mattress left out in the rain. Soft, living, ancient. You look around and realize something. This entire landscape is stitched together by human hands and lake mud. It shouldn't exist, but it does. And you're standing on it. You take a few careful steps along the spongy edge of the chinampa, the ground bouncing ever so slightly beneath your feet. It's a strange sensation, like walking on a memory or a well-fed cloud. On your left, a narrow canal snakes through the gardens, barely wider than a canoe. On your right, shoulder-high stalks of maize rustle gently in the breeze. If there's a better place to take a nap and dream of ancient agriculture, you haven't found it yet. Ahead, a series of bridges connects one island to another. They look delicate, but your guide assures you they're strong. Woven from reeds and mud-covered planks, they've held up for generations. The Aztecs knew their materials. The canals beneath them sparkle in the moonlight, and somewhere, a frog makes a sound suspiciously like it's trying to imitate a flute. You decide to forgive it. Now, here's the thing about Tenochtitlan that most people don't realize. It wasn't just a city surrounded by water. It was a city built on water. The Spaniards who stumbled upon it in the early 1500s were floored. Literally, in some cases, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. A thriving city with towers, pyramids, gardens, markets, even zoos, all perched on the shallow, brackish waters of Lake Texcoco. And yet, somehow, it worked. Tenochtitlan wasn't built all at once, of course. It grew slowly, like a lotus blooming from the mud. At first, it was just a few small settlements on naturally occurring islands. But those islands weren't big enough, not for the population the Mexica people were envisioning. So they expanded, inch by painstaking inch, using mud, rocks, woven mats, and sheer willpower. And oh, did they have willpower! By the time the Spanish arrived, Tenochtitlan had swelled to a city of around 200,000 people, maybe more. That made it one of the largest cities in the world at the time. Bigger than Paris, bigger than London, and all of it built on top of Lake Muck. You can imagine the HOA paperwork. The city was arranged in a near-perfect grid, with causeways leading in and out like spokes on a wheel. There were temples in the center, each dedicated to gods you probably don't want to meet in a dark alley. Surrounding them were schools, homes, ball courts, and open-air markets where you could buy everything from obsidian blades to chocolate drinks laced with chili. But what really made Tenochtitlan hum, the lifeblood of the city, were its canals. Picture narrow waterways crisscrossing the city, like veins under skin. Goods were transported by canoe. Farmers used them to ferry produce straight from the chinampas. Even human waste was collected and floated out to the fields for use as fertilizer. Recycling Aztec style. Honestly, kind of brilliant. Historians still argue whether the city would have survived long-term without European contact. Disease and conquest aside, there were also environmental pressures like flooding and saltwater seepage. But at its peak, the engineering was nothing short of miraculous. You pause near a small inlet where a group of children are playing with tiny boats made of corn husks. Their laughter bounces off the water, light and ephemeral. You wonder what they know of the world beyond these waters. Probably more than you think. The Mexica were no isolated backwater tribe. They were cosmopolitan, curious, and constantly absorbing knowledge from the peoples they conquered or tried to. Everyone was always either teaching or being taught, sometimes by force. The Aztecs had no iron, no wheels, and no horses. But they had math, astronomy, aqueducts, and roads. And they had chinampas. Without those, the city would have starved. With them, it flourished. You step into another canoe, this one smaller, more agile. Your guide pushes you into the canal, where fireflies dance above the water and the reeds whisper secrets to the wind. You glide beneath a low arch where carvings of gods peek through the shadows. Tlaloc with his wide, owl-like eyes. Xochimilco with her flowing skirt and maternal calm. This was her world, too. The goddess of water, lakes, and streams. A perfect hostess for a floating city. The canal widens suddenly, opening onto a larger plaza surrounded by stepped platforms. You realize this is where market canoes would have docked, unloading piles of goods, avocados, cacao beans, jade jewelry, even dried insects sold as snacks. You don't judge. You just look politely away. There's a kind of quiet dignity to the city, even in its humid complexity. You can imagine the rhythms of daily life. The morning chants, the squeak of stone grinders, the rustle of market stalls being unpacked. And above it all, the gentle lapping of water. Always the water. You drift past a row of willow trees planted at the corners of chinampas. These trees weren't decoration, they were anchors. Their roots held the soil in place and prevented erosion. Smart, sustainable, and deeply symbolic. Trees were seen as bridges between worlds. The heavens, the earth, and the waters below. So every garden was a little spiritual nexus, a reminder that you stood between realms. One quirky detail: some chinampas were used solely to grow flowers for rituals and offerings. Bright marigolds, fiery dahlias, and delicate white blossoms known as xochimilco. A city of floating flower beds. Like if Monet painted his gardens onto a swamp and then invited 1,000 gods to dinner. It's worth noting that while these canals and gardens might feel peaceful to us now, they were part of a bustling, often harsh world. Social hierarchies, tribute systems, ritual sacrifice, these were part of the same landscape. You couldn't separate the floating gardens from the obsidian knives. They were both ways to feed the gods. Still, something about this place feels timeless. You pass a young boy casting a net into the canal. He waves at you and flashes a grin full of missing teeth. Behind him, his mother chops chilies on a floating mat. Behind her, a man pulls up lake weed for compost. Behind him, well, you get the idea. This city floats on water. But more than that, it floats on effort. On ritual. On mud, myth, and maize. And tonight, it floats in your dreams. The canoe glides past another row of willows, their silver leaves trembling in the breeze, casting shimmery reflections over the water. You don't speak because somehow you know this is the part where you listen, where the land, or rather the lake, begins to hum its secrets. You've heard the term chinampas already. Those floating gardens that seem like magic. But now you get to see what makes them more than just pretty patches of green. These aren't random tufts of earth. They are layered systems, handcrafted with obsessive care and ancient genius. And they didn't just feed families, they fed a civilization. You drift closer to one now. The guide nudges the canoe up against a low, soft bank, and you climb out with a squelch. Beneath your sandals, the ground yields just slightly, like stepping onto a mossy memory foam mattress. The smell hits you instantly. Earthy, sweet, pungent. A combination of wet roots, decomposing waterweed, and fresh herbs. It's not unpleasant. It smells like life in progress. The chinampa stretches before you, long and narrow, perhaps 30 meters by 2 or 3. On either side, the canal gently laps at the edge. These canals act as natural irrigation, keeping the soil moist at all times. That means plants here don't get thirsty, and farmers never waste time dragging buckets from some distant well. At your feet, rows of maize rise proudly into the air. Some green, some golden, some just beginning to unfurl their leaves. Between the maize are smaller, low-lying crops. Chili peppers, tomatoes, beans, and the tiny yet power-packed amaranth, which the Aztecs revered for its strength-giving properties. It's like quinoa's buff older cousin. Historians agree that this kind of intercropping, the practice of growing different crops together to maximize space and nutrients, was one of the reasons chinampas were so effective. But they still argue whether the chinampas were mainly used for subsistence or commercial agriculture. Were they the Aztec version of backyard gardens? Or more like corporate farms for tribute and trade? What's clear is this: the yield was astonishing. Some chinampas could support up to 7 harvests a year. 7. That's not farming. That's sorcery with a hoe. You crouch down, run your fingers through the soil. It's rich, dark, and smells a little like lake funk and compost. That's because it is compost. These gardens were built by layering mud from the lake bottom, decaying vegetation, and human or animal waste. Add to that chopped up lake weeds like tule and eichhornia, and you've got a growing medium that would make any modern gardener swoon. And they weren't called floating gardens just because they looked dreamy. They actually floated, well, kind of. The earliest chinampas were literally mats of reeds, layered with mud and anchored to the shallow lakebed with stakes. Over time, these mats were stabilized by planting willows or cypress at their corners. The roots of these trees knotted the islands together like organic scaffolding, and eventually the whole garden would become semi-permanent, like a floating patio that grew corn. You pass a woman tending her patch of chilies. She doesn't notice you. Maybe you're invisible to her. She wears a wide-brimmed straw hat and works methodically, her hands moving in rhythm, pulling weeds with one hand and loosening soil with the other. You catch a whiff of the crushed chili leaf she tosses aside. Spicy, green, alive. Nearby, a man kneels beside a patch of squash blossoms, plucking the delicate yellow flowers with practiced grace. These aren't just pretty garnish. They're edible and sacred, often used in tamales or soups, and sometimes as offerings to deities. You imagine a priest biting into a blossom before heading to a temple. That's a whole new level of farm-to-festival cuisine. Not all plants here are food, either. You spot some Pasikil bright orange marigolds used during Day of the Dead ceremonies, which the Aztecs began long before it got its Instagram glow-up. There are also medicinal herbs. Epazote, used to treat stomachaches and repel evil spirits, and tlapatl, a painkiller that probably helped when sacrifices didn't go quite as planned. And yes, that's a cheeky joke. But really, every plant here had a purpose. Practical one, a spiritual one, or both. Birdsong cuts the silence. A small group of blackbirds flits overhead, then settles among the maize. One lets out a screech that sounds suspiciously like it's laughing at you, or maybe warning you. Either way, it adds atmosphere. As you walk deeper into the garden, you notice something peculiar. Little figurines, tucked between the stalks. Tiny clay faces, eyes wide, mouths open as if gasping. Some are cracked, others lovingly painted. These aren't toys. They're offerings. Tokens left for the spirits of the soil and water, meant to protect the crops and ward off pests or bad weather. You think about leaving something, too, a coin, a button, a whisper. You settle on the whisper. A light breeze stirs the corn tassels, and for a moment, the whole chinampa rustles like an orchestra tuning its strings. You pause at the far edge of the garden and look back. It's beautiful, unnaturally, unfairly beautiful. The kind of place that makes you suspicious it's not real. But it is. And it was. And, in a few places, still is. One fringe theory says the layout of chinampas was intentionally cosmic, meant to mirror the stars, or perhaps the Aztec calendar, with its 260-day agricultural cycle. No one's proved it. But when you look at the symmetry, the alignment, the sheer care put into these watery plots, you have to wonder. And then you trip over a gourd. It rolls into the canal with a wet plunk, and your guide just raises an eyebrow like, rookie move. But it makes you smile, because now you're not just watching this world. You're part of it. The sun's completely gone now, and the stars are bold in the sky, thousands of them, peeking through a curtain of ancient air. The chinampas don't sleep, not really. Even at night, they breathe. The soil swells with moisture. The crops bend in their sleep. The water whispers around their ankles. And so do you. Your guide gestures for you to follow again. The soft earth of the chinampa squishes gently underfoot as you step back onto the canoe. It rocks slightly, nothing dramatic, but just enough to remind you that nothing here is stable in the way modern sidewalks are. That's the point, isn't it? This place isn't frozen. It breathes. It moves. Like history. Like dreams. The paddle dips quietly into the water, and you glide down another narrow canal. This time, there's less chatter. Fewer animals. Fewer people. It's just you, the boat, and the cool mist rising from the water's skin. You're about to learn how they built these floating marvels, not just how they worked, but how they were born. Because chinampas didn't appear overnight like mushrooms. They were engineered with gritty precision, layer by mucky layer, in a process that was equal parts ingenuity and squishy determination. Imagine a shallow patch of lake, no more than waist deep. That's where it all begins. The Aztecs would first drive wooden stakes into the lake bed in a rectangular formation. Something modest, maybe 10 by 30 meters. These stakes formed a basic outline, a skeleton of sorts. You've seen garden plots in suburban backyards, right? Now picture one that's halfway underwater and smells faintly of fish. Next came the weaving. The gaps between the stakes were filled in with reed mats, branches, and vines, like ancient scaffolding or a really committed beaver dam. This helped hold back the mud and, more importantly, gave the island something to cling to while it grew. Then the muck began. Buckets of it. Shovelfuls, even armfuls of it. Mud dredged up from the lake bottom was heaped onto the mat in thick, glorious globs. And if you're imagining something between chocolate pudding and wet newspaper, you're not far off. This lake mud, called tlali, was nutrient-rich, thick with decayed plant matter and microorganisms. The kind of gunk that makes tomato plants scream with joy. And it didn't stop at just mud. Oh no, they added dead water plants, shredded reeds, composted kitchen scraps, fish guts, animal waste, and, occasionally, human waste. This may sound horrific to your air-conditioned stomach, but it made the soil so fertile that some chinampas could go years without needing refertilization. Honestly, it puts your little bag of store-bought potting mix to shame. The process was repeated. More reeds. More mud. More glorious gunk. Over time, this built up a raised bed that extended slightly above the waterline. Just high enough to keep roots from rotting, but low enough to let water seep in from below. Perfect balance. Like Goldilocks farming, but with less porridge and more duckweed. Finally came the anchors. At each corner of the new chinampa, the Aztecs planted trees, most often willows or cypress. These weren't just aesthetic. Their root systems would burrow into the lakebed and intertwine with the soil, effectively sewing the chinampa into place like nature's own tent stakes. Over time, the roots would reinforce the structure, preventing erosion and acting like a live border fence. Very eco-friendly. Very Aztec. Historians still debate whether this technique evolved from earlier Mesoamerican wetland farming practices, or if it was an entirely unique innovation. Either way, the system worked so well that it's still being used in pockets of southern Mexico today, centuries after the empire itself crumbled into ruin. You pass a half-finished chinampa now, its framework exposed like the bones of a new world. Two men stand waist-deep in water, hauling in armfuls of rotting weeds from the canal. One sneezes violently. Whether from lake stink or divine judgment, you're not sure. Probably both. And here's a curious thing. Chinampas weren't just agricultural platforms. Some were used to raise ducks or turkeys. Some were used for growing flowers, as you've seen. And others, though not many, were rumored to be burial plots. The lines between life, food, death, and ritual were always a little blurry here. You fertilized the garden with what you had. And sometimes what you had was a person. You glide past a tiny hut built right on top of a chinampa. Smoke curls lazily from a small fire pit, and inside, a woman stirs a pot that smells like beans and herbs. A dog dozes outside, ears twitching. This is how families lived, on these floating beds, surrounded by food, water, and community. No need for long commutes. No need for storage silos. Your pantry literally grew outside your front door. One fringe theory suggests that chinampas served a religious role in Aztec cosmology, that they represented the earth itself, a stable mass rising from the chaotic waters of creation. Each chinampa, then, was a miniature version of the world. A floating myth sustained by sweat and prayer. No one's sure if that's true, but you feel something sacred in the way the soil warms your hands. In the way the trees lean just so. Your guide stops paddling and lets the canoe drift. You float silently past a field of wildflowers now, mostly white and red, glowing faintly in the moonlight. A pair of frogs launches into the water with 2 tiny splashes. Crickets pick up the slack. You glance behind and realize the half-built chinampa is now out of view. Already it's like it was never there, like the lake has swallowed it back into myth. The stars will gently above you, and somewhere in the distance, you hear laughter. A soft thud of someone pounding maize into masa. A splash of an oar. These gardens didn't rise from the water by chance. They were summoned, willed into existence by generations of hands, each one layering mud onto mud, belief onto belief, until finally, a farm floated and a civilization soared. The night deepens around you, but the floating garden doesn't sleep. Not really. Insects hum, the water murmurs, and somewhere, a soft splash suggests a fisherman just cast his net. You're standing now in the heart of one of the most productive ecosystems in human history, and it's entirely man-made. Welcome to the Aztec pantry. Let's talk about what actually grew here. What these fertile rafts of mud and magic produce day after day, season after season, to keep the city of Tenochtitlan thriving. You bend slightly and brush your fingers across a stalk of maize. It's tall, golden, and utterly regal, like it knows it's the backbone of a civilization. Corn wasn't just a food source for the Aztecs, it was a deity, a myth, a birthright. Entire festivals revolved around planting and harvesting it. Some rituals even included shaping the first tortilla of the season into a little face. You wouldn't dare bite into it. That would be rude. Instead, you'd offer it back to the earth. Thank you for feeding us. Please don't stop. Historians agree that maize cultivation reached almost supernatural efficiency in chinampas. With access to fresh water, dense nutrient-rich soil, and a subtropical climate, Aztec farmers produced corn in quantities that modern agribusiness would envy, without pesticides, tractors, or Wi-Fi-controlled sprinklers. It's humbling, honestly. But corn didn't stand alone. If maize was the sturdy warrior, then beans were the clever scribe. Grown beside the corn stalks, they climbed and curled up the tall stems like tiny green acrobats. This wasn't just adorable, it was smart. The beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, replenishing it naturally. And down below, squash spread wide leaves, shielding the ground and keeping moisture in. The famed 3 sisters of Mesoamerican agriculture, maize, beans, and squash, performed a botanical symphony. Efficient, balanced, delicious. You squat beside a patch of wazental, a wild cousin of quinoa with a taste somewhere between broccoli and defiance. The Aztecs loved this stuff. So much so that Spanish conquistadors eventually banned its cultivation because it was used in pagan rituals. The irony? It's now making a comeback in trendy Mexican health cafes. History doesn't always repeat itself, but sometimes it rebrands. Near the water's edge, bright chili plants wave their little fire bombs in the breeze. Chili was to the Aztec palate what emojis are to texting, absolutely everywhere and impossible to ignore. Some households reportedly used over 30 different types. Think you can handle the heat? A common breakfast for a farmer here might have included maize porridge spiked with chili and salt. No milk, no sugar, just vibes and capsaicin. Historians still debate how much of the Aztec diet was plant-based versus supplemented with fish or insects. The answer seems to be a lot of both. Alongside the chinampas, fishermen pulled in axolotls, frogs, carp, and tiny fish using woven nets. Dragonflies and grasshoppers were collected, toasted, and eaten as snacks, salty, crunchy, protein-packed, and surprisingly tasty if you believe the elders. Or TikTok. You pass another garden patch and spot tomatillos, their paper husks glowing softly in the moonlight like tiny lanterns. They're ready to burst, tart and tangy, waiting to be blended into a green salsa. Next to them, you see chia, the ancient superfood that now comes in expensive smoothie bowls. Back then, it was ground into flour, mixed with water for energy drinks, or offered to the gods in symbolic rituals. The gods had good taste. You lean close to a low bush with tiny white flowers. This episode medicinal, fragrant, and very, very divisive. People either love its pungent aroma or claim it smells like wet socks left in a temple basement. But to the Aztecs, it was precious. Used to ease digestion, repel parasites, and ward off evil spirits. Or maybe that was just what they told the kids to get them to eat it. A dog trots past, nose twitching. It pauses near a patch of xochimilco marigolds, bright orange and impossibly vivid even in the low light. These weren't grown for salads. They were grown for souls, placed on altars and graves, used in ceremonies. They were believed to guide spirits from the underworld with their intense color and sharp scent. A bouquet for the dead, a compass for the invisible. You start to notice patterns in the planting. It's not just random. Crops are grouped not only by how they grow, but by what they mean. Plants for strength, plants for balance, plants for healing, plants for memory. You're walking through a living prayer, each row a line of poetry written in chlorophyll. And then there are the flowers. You come to a chinampa that's purely ornamental. Rows upon rows of blooming color. Not for food, not for medicine, just for beauty. Or maybe not just, maybe beauty itself was a kind of sustenance. These flowers would be picked, strung, floated in rivers, laid at temples, braided into hair. Not everything had to be useful. Some things existed to remind you that life could be lush, fragrant, and unnecessary in the best way. One fringe theory suggests that entire neighborhoods of Tenochtitlan specialized in growing different types of crops, each district known for its own variety of maize, flour, or herb. Imagine walking to the tomato burrow or the amaranth quarter on a market day. That's the kind of urban farming we can only dream of now. And it all grew on water. Every ear of corn, every chili pepper, every flower crown. Fed by canals, tended by hands, balanced between buoyancy and gravity. The earth here was optional, but growth, that was guaranteed. The stars above glisten a little brighter now, or maybe your eyes are adjusting. You reach out and touch the edge of a corn leaf, its waxy surface damp with dew. Somewhere behind you, a night bird calls. You feel full, not with food but with knowing. You've seen what floated. And now you know what grew. You're still floating, at least your canoe is, but this time, the darkness is velvet thick, and only the occasional lantern from a distant chinampa flickers like a firefly in the mist. The lake breathes slowly. The gardens exhale warmth and fragrance, even in the chill. You pass a patch of lilies, their white petals half-closed like sleepy eyes. This night in the Valley of Mexico, but for some, the work is just beginning. You round a bend, and suddenly you're not alone. A procession of long, narrow canoes glides silently across the water. No torches, just the soft creak of oars and the sound of hushed voices. You drift closer and realize they're full of flowers. Armfuls, piles, whole mounds of xochimilco, quixochitl, and delicate garlands of white blossoms. Each canoe a floating garden in itself, lit only by the starlight, their colors muted but unmistakable. These are the night harvesters. While the city sleeps, they gather the sacred and the beautiful for the morning markets. Flower farming wasn't just decoration, it was an economy, a ceremony, and a kind of nocturnal poetry. These blossoms will be sold in the Tenochtitlan, the great markets of Tenochtitlan, where color was currency and scent was persuasion. You hear the whisper of water sliding under the boat hulls, like silk pulled over stone. No one hurries. Every movement is practiced, balanced. The canoes pass each other like dancers in a slow-motion ritual. A child sleeps curled under a blanket beside her mother's flower baskets. Somewhere further down the canal, a flute plays, a single note drawn out, then released into silence. Historians agree the Aztecs held regular nighttime harvests, especially for flowers. The cool air preserved freshness. The quiet made for easier travel. And there's something intimate about harvesting by moonlight, like plucking stars from the soil. But it wasn't just flowers being moved at night. You begin to notice more boats. some stacked with woven baskets of maize, others with bundles of herbs, dried beans, live ducks, and even pottery. These aren't smugglers. They're early risers. The first wave of marketgoers moving goods toward the city center, trying to beat the sun and the crowd. In Tenochtitlan, the market opened with dawn. But the best spots? They were claimed by starlight. You float along one such cargo canoe now. Its owner, a man wrapped in a striped tilma, nods at you. His boat smells of crushed cilantro and warm loam. At his feet, a bundle of amaranth cakes wrapped in leaves rests like sleepy babies. That'll be breakfast for some family on the far side of the city. Probably eaten with chili sauce and a joke about the gods. One quirky detail: the Aztecs had canoe traffic rules. Left side to pass. Right side for slower vessels. It was a city of canals, after all, not chaos. Guards sometimes patrolled the waterways, keeping things orderly. Imagine Venetian gondoliers with obsidian clubs and a working knowledge of maize-based taxation. Your canoe slips into a wider waterway now, almost a lake within the lake. At its center floats a large platform lit with floating candles. You squint. It's not a garden. It's a cumidal, a ceremonial raft. And tonight it's being used. A group of women in white robes stands barefoot on the platform. They sing a low, hypnotic melody that shivers the water's surface. Around them, bundles of herbs, flower arrangements, and small clay figures. This is a ritual to xochimilco, goddess of beauty, love, and yes, flowers. Offerings are cast into the water. Petals drift like feathers. A thin column of smoke rises, scenting the air with copal. You try not to blink. This isn't a performance. It's devotion. In the Aztec world, even farming was sacred. Every harvest, every blossom, every canoe ride through the reeds could become a prayer. And here you are, accidentally attending a floating mass. Historians still argue about how widespread these waterborne rituals were. Were they monthly, seasonal, reserved for elites? Some say they were common. Others think they were rare spectacles. What's certain is this: the lakes weren't just transportation hubs or farms. They were temples in motion. As the ceremony fades into silence, you drift onward. Another bend. Another moment. Ahead, a wide pier stretches into the canal. Canoes are pulling up alongside it, one after the other, unloading their goods in quiet efficiency. Market prep is beginning, and it's still hours before sunrise. You hop out with your guide, feet finding stone again. This pier leads directly to the Tlatelolco market, one of the biggest in the empire. During the day, it will hold up to 60,000 people. Traders, shoppers, spies, priests, tourists. But for now, it's just the early vendors, stacking chilies into pyramids and arranging flowers like holy relics. A young boy wipes down a row of gourds, then sets a basket of squash blossoms beside them. He smiles, yawns, and slumps against a wall. You get it. It's been a long night of floating, gathering, glowing. And maybe that's what makes this place so unforgettable. It's not just a marvel of agriculture. It's a ballet of hands and hearts, moving in rhythm with water and moonlight. Even the markets are graceful. Even the commerce hums with myth. You sit on the pier's edge and dangle your feet in the canal. The water laps gently at your toes, warm from the day's sun, cool from the night's breath. Somewhere, a rooster stirs. Morning is coming. But not yet. Not quite. For now, the gardens still float. The flowers still sail. And you are part of the harvest moon's silent parade. The rooster crows again. Louder this time. Somewhere far off, a conch shell echoes in response. Deep, hollow, otherworldly. You're not sure if it's a greeting or a warning, but either way, it marks a shift. The night is melting, slowly, into morning. You ease back into the canoe, your guide giving you a subtle nod. No words are spoken. You drift away from the market pier, watching as the flower-laden canoes dock one by one. The city is waking up. But you're heading in a different direction. Not all is serene in this water-wrapped world. For every chinampa blooming with maize, there's a weed strangling its roots. For every canoe of flowers, there's one built for battle. Peace was a luxury here, earned, taxed, and never taken for granted. You glide past a wide canal flanked by larger gardens, and you notice something different. These chinampas are neglected, overgrown with reeds, tangled with algae. The soil looks crusty, cracked at the edges. A woman stands in one of them, holding a broken rake. She's not tending, she's scavenging. For what, you don't know. Maybe for something that used to grow here. Maybe for what was lost. This, your guide whispers, is the reality during hard years. Droughts, floods, crop diseases. Chinampas were extraordinary, but they weren't invincible. Without regular maintenance, the canals clog. The earth dries out, roots rot, and in times of war, entire sections were abandoned, left to sink back into the lake like forgotten prayers. Historians still debate the full scale of environmental stress on the Chinampa system. Some believe overuse and poor management in later periods led to irreversible damage. Others argue the collapse came mainly from Spanish disruption. But one thing is clear. These gardens were delicate, for all their beauty, and when the balance tipped even a little, they withered fast. You turn a corner, and now you're facing something completely different. A patrol canoe, long, sleek, and unmistakably armed. The men aboard wear cotton armor and carry obsidian-bladed clubs called macuahuitl. Their eyes flick toward you. One narrows his gaze. You try to look casual, like just another tourist with a spiritual farming obsession. These are canoe warriors trained not just for battle, but for protection. The waterways needed guarding, not just from bandits, but from rival city-states that eyed Tenochtitlan's lush canals with envy. Tribes from Texcoco, Tlaxcala, and beyond often launched raids. And guess what their targets were? The Chinampas. Destroy the food, starve the city. Classic tactic. Effective and brutal. You paddle on, now entering a part of the canal that's wider, like a floating highway. Trade canoes zip by, and in the distance, you hear the sharp clack of paddles against water. Someone is moving fast. Too fast. Suddenly, a blur of motion streaks past your canoe. It's a boy, maybe 12, standing at the bow of a narrow craft, hollering something about a missing goose. Behind him, a very annoyed goose honks back from another boat. There's chaos, there's comedy, and it's very human. Even in wartime, life continues. Children still chase birds. Traders still argue over squash prices. Lovers still meet in secret among the reeds. But underneath all of that, there's pressure. You pass a cluster of chinampas heavily fortified with woven fences and extra trees. These are high-value plots. Some even have ceremonial altars, where prayers are whispered for fertility, protection, rain. Not every threat came with a sword. Sometimes the threat was the sky. Flooding was a constant terror. Lake Texcoco was notoriously unstable, part freshwater, part salt. Without careful diking and canal control, salt could seep into the gardens, poisoning the soil. You hear your guide mutter Tlilantlapalan, the black and red lands. It's a poetic term for balance, order and chaos, life and ruin. The Aztecs built elaborate systems to manage the lake's moods. Dikes to separate fresh from brackish water, sluice gates to control flow, causeways with openings to allow canoes through but stop surges. They were engineers as much as they were warriors, and farmers, and priests. But even with all this effort, disaster could strike. One recorded flood in the 15th century nearly wiped out a third of the Chinampa zone. Canoes floated through marketplaces. Crops drowned in their own homes. The people rebuilt, because that's what they did. But scars remained. Historians still argue whether the Aztec elite fully understood how fragile their agricultural foundation was. Some claim they ignored warning signs, like modern developers ignoring rising seas. Others suggest they were hyper-aware, and rituals were their way of trying to restore balance when science couldn't. You pass under another arch bridge. This one collapsed halfway, its reeds sagging like an old man's shoulders. The canal here is clogged with duckweed. It smells stronger. Less garden, more compost bin. You wrinkle your nose. And yet, amid the rot, you see new growth. Vines pushing through cracks. A lone sunflower nodding above the muck. Life returns, even when it's not invited. Your guide points to a small plot being rebuilt. A boy and his father pile mud onto a reed mat, sweat glistening in the rising sun. Their movements are rhythmic, almost meditative. Reclaiming a chinampa is hard work, but it's a statement, too. You don't give up on floating gardens. You don't let the lake win. In the distance, you see a larger canoe approaching. Not a war boat, not a trade vessel. A priest's raft, covered in woven mats and adorned with hanging feathers and flowers. He's coming to bless the rebuilders. Maybe it's showmanship, maybe it's faith, maybe both. You close your eyes for a moment and just listen. Water, paddles, birds, soft voices. The world tilting between threat and hope. Floating gardens may sound peaceful, and often they were. But they were also contested, defended, flooded, rebuilt, and fought over. These were not lazy farms. They were battlegrounds for survival. And you're right in the middle of it. But don't worry. You're floating. You're safe. You're exactly where the story needs you. The sun rises slow and syrupy over the lake, dripping gold across the still waters. It touches the chinampas one by one, waking up the dew-covered leaves, warming the reeds, and casting long shadows from the rows of maize like outstretched arms in prayer. You squint. It's beautiful, unfairly so, but there's something else stirring too, something older than crops and canoes. Your guide dips his paddle once, twice, then lets the canoe drift again. He gestures ahead. You follow his eyes toward a wide, silent grove at the edge of the lake. The chinampas here feel different, quieter, more watched. There's no movement, no farmers, no trade boats, just stillness, and trees that seem to lean inward, guarding whatever rests within. This, your guide whispers, is where the gods live. You ease the canoe into the grove, the air growing heavier with every inch. The reeds hush, the birds go silent. Even the insects seem to hold their breath. And then, emerging from behind a curtain of willow branches, you see it. A small stone altar, half sunk in the soil of a chinampa, circled with offerings. Bundles of maize, feathers, bits of obsidian, and faded flowers turned to papery ghosts. You've arrived at a sacred chinampa, a garden not meant to feed stomachs, but to feed the divine. Tlaloc comes to mind first. The rain god with goggle eyes and a toothy grin that somehow looks both playful and terrifying. He ruled the waters, the storms, the thunderheads that rolled in across the mountains. And when he was pleased, the rains came gently. When he was angry, the floods rose like curses. Tlaloc's presence is everywhere in these gardens. In the irrigation canals, in the clouds above, in the morning mist. Farmers whispered to him before planting. Priests poured offerings into the lake to appease him. Children were sometimes sacrificed in his honor, their tears said to bring the rains. Yes, that's dark. But to the Aztecs, rain was life. And life, like the lake, was always a bargain. Next to Tlaloc, there was Xilanen, goddess of young maize. You can imagine her more softly. Wrapped in green, hair braided with silk tassels, her skin golden with pollen. She represented the first harvest, the tender shoots, the promise of food. Her statues often held ears of corn like infants. She wasn't just a deity. She was a season. Historians still argue how much influence local farmers had in shaping these religious practices. Did they worship because they truly believed, or because the empire required it? Was it fear, or faith, or simply the way things had always been? There's no clear answer. And honestly, maybe there doesn't need to be one. You disembark now, stepping onto the sacred chinampa with caution. The ground here feels different, cooler, as if it remembers every footstep, every prayer, every offering placed in the soil. You kneel beside the altar. The offerings are weathered but still recognizable. Dried maize kernels, a carved jade bead, a woven bracelet. Each one speaks a quiet story. A breeze rustles the trees, and the leaves hiss a soft warning. Not to leave, but to listen. You remember earlier, those little clay faces buried among the maize. Now you realize they weren't decorations. They were guardians, spirit helpers, invited to watch over the crop, to protect the cycle. In a world without fences, this was how you marked sacred ground. You stand and follow your guide deeper into the grove. The chinampas here are smaller, less cultivated. Wildflowers take over the rows. Medicinal herbs grow in tangles, tlapatl, for pain. Yotli for anxiety. Xochimilco for fevers. This isn't food production. It's a living pharmacy, and a spiritual one. Healers came here to gather plants. So did midwives. So did those seeking answers not found in the city's temples. And then you see the tree. At the very center of the grove, a massive awi tree stretches skyward, its roots tangled into the water, its branches sweeping low like an old dancer's arms. The tree is ringed with stones and feathers. Children used to tie colored strings around its trunk. Some still do. It said this tree was planted the day the first chinampa was laid. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. What matters is that people believe it. One quirky bit of lore? Some say that if you whisper your deepest desire into the bark of the awi at dawn, it will float through the canals until it reaches Tlaloc. But you mustn't look back. Not even once. Or he'll send it right back with interest. You laugh under your breath, then glance behind you just in case. Your guide plucks a white flower from the ground and sets it by the altar. No words, just a gesture. You follow suit, adding a small pebble from your pocket. Smooth and gray, unremarkable, but it's yours. And now it belongs here. You feel something settle in your chest. Not fear, not awe exactly, just stillness. A kind of ancient recognition, like the land knows you're here, like it's been waiting. As you return to the canoe, the grove behind you folds back into shadow. You half expect it to vanish completely. Maybe it will. Maybe it already has. Back on the water, the spell lifts slightly. A heron calls from across the canal. A ripple disturbs the lilies. The world reawakens. But you carry something now. A whisper in your palm. A root in your memory. These gardens weren't just farms. They were sacred scripts written in mud and maize. And the gods? They were always watching, smiling, listening, especially when you thought they weren't. You drift back into the open water, the grove of gods slowly fading into the green behind you. The air feels lighter now, less sacred, more alive. The sun has climbed higher, spreading light across the lake like honey. You notice steam rising off the water in little swirls. Even the insects seem more energetic, buzzing from blossom to blossom with renewed purpose. As the canoe slides along, your guide nods toward a nearby chinampa where two women bend low among rows of herbs. They're talking, laughing softly, the rhythm of their conversation matching the movements of their hands. One carries a clay basket strapped to her hip. The other wears a wide-brimmed hat woven from palm fronds, patched with something that might be turkey feathers. These are garden women, and in the floating world of the chinampas, they hold more power than you might think. You glide past them slowly, and without even turning, one of them raises a hand in greeting. It's a casual wave, practiced gesture, like she's been doing it every morning for 1,000 years. In Aztec society, gender roles were clearly defined, but they weren't rigid in the ways you might expect. Women weren't just domestic caretakers. They were farmers, healers, traders, and in rare cases, warriors. And in the watery world of the chinampas, they were essential. Historians agree that women played a major role in tending smaller family plots. They managed the herbs, vegetables, and flowers. They harvested, they weeded, they processed the food. It was a whole system of knowledge passed down mother to daughter, rooted in rhythm and intuition. Ask any grandmother. She'll tell you when the beans are ready long before they change color. One woman you pass is laying out bundles of dried chili to sun-cure on a flat reed mat. Another is singing quietly as she picks squash blossoms and arranges them into neat circles. Her voice rises and falls with the paddling of your canoe. You don't know the words, but the melody lingers. Nearby, a young man casts a net into the canal. He pulls it back with a fluid, practiced motion, just lakeweed and a single small fish this time. He shrugs, rebaits the edge with something shiny, and tosses again. His feet are planted on a narrow wooden board that bridges two chinampas. He barely wobbles. While women focused on the garden plots and homes, men often managed the canal systems, fishing, boat-making, and transporting goods to and from the markets. But the lines blurred constantly. You'd find women punting canoes to market, their faces shaded under thick head wraps. And you'd find men delicately arranging flower garlands for a ritual. This wasn't gender equality in the modern sense, but it was balance. Function mattered more than form. You float past a tiny home tucked into the corner of a chinampa. It's little more than a clay room with a thatched roof and a small outdoor cooking area. Smoke rises from the cook fire. A woman inside grinds maize on a metate, the rhythmic scrape of stone on stone echoing across the water. Her daughter plays with a reed doll nearby, dunking it into a puddle and pretending to fish. You smile. Some things never change. One quirky detail about gender in Aztec farming? There were midwives specifically trained not just in childbirth but in agriculture-related omens. They'd read the signs in a newborn's umbilical cord, the color of the maize silk, the number of tadpoles in the canal. Your future might be written in your field before you ever walked through it. Historians still argue how much autonomy women truly had in this world. Were they independent stewards of their own gardens? Or bound by the expectations of the household? The answer, as always, is somewhere in between. But here, in the Chinampa zone, what's clear is this: their labor fed the empire. Quietly, steadily, daily. You pass by another canoe, this one loaded with firewood and cooking pots. A teenage boy at the front looks bored out of his mind. His little sister is behind him, leaning over the side, trying to catch minnows with her bare hands. Their father rows from the back with quiet patience. A family commute Aztec style. And here's the wild part. There were entire neighborhoods in Tenochtitlan made up of Chinampa families. Generations who lived, worked, and ate directly off the floating plots they inherited. Land didn't just mean wealth. It meant connection. A root system not just for plants but for people. As you turn into another narrow canal, the sounds shift again. Less laughter. More effort. A group of older boys are dredging the canal bottom, hauling up buckets of lake mud to rebuild a collapsed edge. The work is messy, and they're covered in sludge, but they joke as they work, flicking water at each other like overgrown ducklings. One boy spots you, waves his shovel dramatically, and then promptly loses his balance and falls in. His friends howl. The lake accepts him with a splash and no judgment. Life here is layered. Joy doesn't wait for ceremony. It sneaks into the hard work, the early mornings, the wet feet. And the Chinampas, though soaked in myth, were lived in, sweated on, laughed through. This wasn't some postcard version of paradise. It was home. You pass by a Chinampa where a woman hangs laundry on a line strung between two trees. The fabrics flap gently in the breeze. Woven cotton tunics, a baby wrap, a bundle of long reed mats. Everything here dries in the sun, cooks in clay, breathes in the water. Even the clothes seem to float. You think about your own daily rhythm. Alarms, deadlines, the fluorescent hum of a fridge door opening at 2 a.m. Then you look at this garden, at the hands that tend it, the water that feeds it, the child still trying to catch a fish with her fingers. And you think, maybe there's another way to live. Maybe it starts in the mud. The light has shifted again. It's now late morning, and everything feels more vivid, more awake. The colors of the Chinampas are saturated to the point of disbelief. Green upon green, punctuated by bursts of gold and crimson from blooming flowers or ripening fruit. The sun glints off the water like scattered coins. You shade your eyes and lean forward as your canoe moves through a broader channel now, and suddenly, there it is, Tenochtitlan. The heart of the Aztec Empire rises ahead like a mirage. Only this isn't some desert illusion. It's a living, pulsing city balanced on water. Temples pierce the sky. Stone walkways stretch across the lake like veins. The markets ripple with activity. But what you notice most? The water. It's everywhere, threading the city together like a silk net. This is the Venice of the New World. That's what the Spaniards called it anyway, after their jaws hit the floor and they remembered how to write things down. When Hernán Cortés and his band of armored adventurers first laid eyes on Tenochtitlan in 1519, They couldn't believe what they saw. A metropolis of stone and water, grander than anything they'd imagined, more organized than anything they'd built, and cleaner, way cleaner than Europe at the time. You float closer, slipping into one of the city's countless canal routes. You pass under a low archway, its bricks sun-warmed and moss-kissed. Beyond it, the traffic picks up. Canoes bump gently as traders, priests, and everyday folks go about their business. You see a woman selling tamales from her boat, a priest murmuring chants over a bundle of herbs, a pair of teenagers laughing as they toss flower petals into the current. The city doesn't just float, it dances. Historians agree that Tenochtitlan was a marvel of urban planning. The chinampa system extended into the city itself, creating garden-filled neighborhoods and neighborhoods that floated. A grid of canals crisscrossed the streets, allowing for transportation of goods, water, and people. It was efficient. It was elegant. It was practical in a way modern cities only pretend to be. And yes, you could fall in. Happens to everyone, including nobles, especially nobles. Your canoe edges along a wide canal lined with market stalls. On raised stone platforms, vendors shout over the splash of paddles. You spot woven mats stacked high with tomatoes, cacao beans, pottery, jade jewelry, obsidian knives, and dried fish. You even pass a stand selling live axolotls, tiny aquatic salamanders that look like smiling aliens. The seller waves enthusiastically. The axolotls blink slowly. Everything in Tenochtitlan ran on trade. And at the center of it all was Tlatelolco, the empire's largest market. On peak days, it hosted up to 60,000 people. That's not a crowd, that's a small country. Merchants came from every part of the empire, the Gulf Coast, the highlands, the jungles. They traveled days or weeks by canoe, on foot, or with tamims, human porters, carrying goods on their backs with the help of forehead straps. Money? Well, that's where it gets interesting. The Aztecs used a kind of tiered barter system, with cacao beans functioning as currency. Yes, chocolate as money. A turkey? Around 100 beans. A prostitute? Slightly more, depending on the time of day and market saturation. Historians still debate the ethics of that particular trade rate. And if you had real clout, you could trade in cotton cloaks, which were worth significantly more than beans. Rare feathers, carved stones, and polished obsidian blades also counted as high-value items. But for daily life, beans were king. You pass by a priest performing a small ritual by the canal's edge. He's tossing flower petals and murmuring something to the water. A woman behind him rolls her eyes. Not because she's skeptical, she's just in a hurry. Ritual or not, she's got herbs to sell. One quirky thing you notice? The garbage collection system. Canoe-based sanitation workers drift from house to house, collecting waste and kitchen scraps to be composted or used in the chinampas. Nothing wasted. Nothing thrown away. It's a closed-loop system. You try to remember the last time your trash pickup came with a view of a temple and a family of ducks. You float past the Tzompantli, a skull rack. It's quieter here. Heavier. Rows of skulls stare blankly across the canal, mounted on wooden stakes. A stark reminder that while the city was beautiful, it was also built on bones. Religion and sacrifice were woven into everything, the markets, the temples, even the crops. Blood fed the gods. Maize fed the people. Balance was maintained. Historians still argue how much of this spectacle was for power and how much was true devotion. Did the Aztecs believe their rituals kept the sun moving and the rain falling? Or was it all political theater? Probably both. Humans are complicated that way. Your canoe turns again, drifting into a quieter section of the city. Here you see more homes, stone and adobe, decorated with painted murals and woven banners. Children play in the canals. A dog barks at a turtle. Laundry hangs between two willows, catching the breeze. Feels like life. Real, daily, sometimes soggy life. You pass a narrow chinampa built right against a home. A man leans over, pulling waterweed from the edge. His wife stands nearby, tossing scraps to ducks. It's not grand. It's not ceremonial. It's Tuesday, and it's perfect. Tenochtitlan, for all its grandeur, wasn't just temples and sacrifices. It was families, food, flowers. A city of floating gardens and floating stories. And you're floating through both. You drift slowly out of the city again, past the last stone piers and temple steps, back into the open fingers of the chinampa zones. The noise of Tenochtitlan recedes behind you like a heartbeat fading into mist. The sun is high now. Its rays reflect off the water in blinding flashes, and the chinampas shimmer like they're barely tethered to this world. But you know better. You've walked them, felt their squish, smelled their fertile breath. You've seen their rhythm, their rituals, their role in feeding an empire. Now comes the part where it all falls apart. Not immediately, but fast. It starts with sickness. You hear whispers of it as your canoe glides past a floating market. A vendor coughs, pulls her shawl tighter. A man steers his canoe with sluggish strokes, face pale. The market still hums, but there's an edge to it now, an undertone of worry. You pass a mother clutching her child, whispering prayers to Tlaloc. The child's forehead gleams with sweat. You know what's coming even if they don't. Smallpox, brought by the Spanish. A disease that would rage like fire through the crowded chinampa zones, leaping from one canoe to the next, from one house to the next, leaving silence in its wake. Historians agree that epidemics devastated the indigenous population more than any sword ever could. In some regions, up to 90% of people perished. And here, in the floating gardens, where people lived cheek to jowl in water-linked neighborhoods, the sickness spread mercilessly. You pass a canal choked with waterweed and unmanned canoes. A chinampa sits half-submerged, its edges crumbling, maize stalks bent and broken. No one is tending it. No one has for weeks. A lone heron picks through the soft soil, confused. It's not supposed to be this quiet. Disease wasn't the only blow. With Cortez and his men came war. Cannons, horses, steel blades. You spot signs of battle along the water. A broken causeway, a burned hut, spear shafts sticking out of tree trunks like arrows frozen mid-flight. The chinampas were strategic assets. They fed the city, yes, but they also served as natural barriers. The Aztecs used them to slow down Spanish advances, hiding warriors in the reeds, launching ambushes from behind the willows. Canoes were used like cavalry. The water was their home turf, but Cortez was patient and ruthless. He had allies from rival tribes, Tlaxcalans mostly, who knew the terrain. He had guns. And most of all, he had time. He laid siege to the city, cutting off supplies, burning causeways, poisoning the very lake itself. Fresh water became tainted. The canals turned to traps. The gardens stopped floating. They started dying. Historians still argue whether the chinampas could have survived had the conquest not occurred. Some suggest the system was already showing signs of strain, soil exhaustion, overfarming, salinization. Others believe it would have endured, adapted, evolved. But the truth is, we'll never know. The conquest didn't just disrupt the system. It shattered it. You pass a chinampa-turned graveyard. Not a metaphor. Real graves. Hasty mounds of earth beneath a crooked cross. A child's toy lies half-buried nearby. A reed fish, broken in two. You feel something tighten in your chest. Not fear, grief. But even in this moment of devastation, there's a glimmer. You round another bend, and suddenly life. A woman tending a patch of herbs. She doesn't look up, but her hands move with purpose. A man repairs a collapsed canal wall. A boy casts a net and pulls up 3 glimmering fish. These are survivors, rebuilders, people who chose to return to the water and make something grow. Because the chinampas didn't disappear overnight. They were damaged, abandoned, reclaimed, but they endured. Some were taken over by Spanish settlers. Others were repurposed. Still others sank beneath the lake, their outlines only visible from the air centuries later. But a few kept going. Your canoe glides through a section that looks nearly whole again. The gardens are smaller, the variety thinner, but they're alive. You see maize, beans, squash, echoes of the old ways. A young girl gathers water in a clay pot, her dog trailing behind her. The dog stops, sniffs the air, and looks at you with wise, dark eyes. You nod. He nods back. Or maybe you just imagined it. You pass a stone tablet half covered in moss. The glyphs are eroded, but you recognize the symbol for Twilight Earth. It's cracked, but it's still standing. And just beyond it, another sacred tree. Younger, smaller, but rooted deep. A new start. The floating gardens didn't vanish. They fractured, sank, hid, but they also adapted. Pieces of them were carried into colonial farming practices. Some of their irrigation methods were mimicked in Spanish estates. Some of their crops, amaranth, chia, tomatillos, found their way into global diets. And in one part of Mexico City, modern-day Xochimilco, they still float. Sort of. You'll get there soon. For now, you float quietly past the ruin and the regrowth, feeling both in equal measure. The water whispers a lullaby of loss and resilience. The chinampas may not rule an empire anymore. But they're not gone. They're waiting. And they remember. The air smells different now. You're no longer in the empire of temples and tribute, but in something quieter, something breathing beneath concrete and car horns. The reeds are fewer here. The birds are scarcer. But the water still reflects the sun just the same. And ahead of you, floating on its surface like a stubborn memory, is Xochimilco. You've left the ancient capital behind. Tenochtitlan is gone. Paved over, built on, layered with glass buildings, tangled with power lines, humming with taxi engines. But here, in this southern stretch of modern-day Mexico City, the chinampas remain. Barely. You glide into Xochimilco's canal system, narrower than what you remember, but still elegant. Still alive. Brightly painted trajineras, flat-bottomed boats with names like Lupita, Rosita, and Rey Azteca, bump gently against the docks. Loudspeakers play mariachi music. Tourists laugh too loudly. Somewhere, someone is selling beer and roasted corn with lime and chili. You pass it all with a kind of reverence. It's not what it was, but it's not nothing. Xochimilco's chinampas are a hybrid now. Part living farm, part cultural attraction, part act of defiance. Some plots are run by elderly farmers, still tending their maize and amaranth with calloused hands and inherited wisdom. Others are owned by cooperatives, young people trying to revive the ancient ways before the canals silt over completely. You pull up beside one of these plots. A man in a wide-brimmed hat waves. He looks like he's in his 30s, though his hands suggest decades of work. Behind him, a small team of workers tends rows of lettuce and marigold, amaranth and cilantro. A banner flaps on the edge of the plot. It reads, Las Chinampas Viven. The Chinampas live. He shows you around, proud, but not boastful. The soil is still rich, still spongy. The canals, though narrower now, still irrigate the land. He explains how they use compost from local restaurants, how schoolchildren come to learn here, how every harvest feels like a quiet act of protest. Historians agree that Xochimilco is the last living remnant of the Chinampa system, though it now covers only a fraction of what it once did. Estimates vary, but some say less than 5% of the original network remains active. The rest, buried under highways, sunk into suburban sprawl, or simply forgotten. And yet, this sliver survives. One quirky initiative? Some farms here now grow ancient ingredients, specifically for gourmet restaurants in Mexico City. Think purple maize tortillas, wild arugula that tastes like peppered earth, chia sprouted in canal water. High-end chefs pay top peso for what once fed warrior priests. You stroll slowly along a narrow wooden board between two plots. The air smells of mint, compost, and wet dirt. The flowers are familiar, those same bright orange marigolds, those same pale white blossoms you saw floating toward the altar. A child sits cross-legged near the water, sketching in a notebook. You peek, she's drawing maize with eyes. You pass a sign that reads, Proyecto Chinampa, an effort to restore, to protect, to revive. Some of these projects are funded by universities, some by grants. Others are held together with stubborn hope, duct tape, and community love. Historians still argue whether Chinampa revival is sustainable. Can it feed a modern city? Can it survive pollution, bureaucracy, climate change? But when you look around at the green, the water, the work, those arguments feel far away. Too clean. Too theoretical. Here everything is messy, muddy, alive. You speak briefly with a woman who manages one of the eco-projects. She tells you they use ancient planting calendars, aligned with moon phases and star positions. She says the kids call the canal spirits the whisperers. She laughs. Then she gets serious. This isn't just nostalgia, she says. It's survival. A canoe passes by, loaded with crates of just harvested lettuce. The man rowing waves, teeth white against sunburned skin. Behind him, a dog barks once. A heron takes off in slow motion, its wings slicing the sunlight. And you realize something. This isn't just a relic. This is a future that still remembers the past. You pass a tiny altar tucked beneath a willow tree. On it, a candle, a doll made of corn husks, and a handful of beans. It's new, but it could have been placed there 500 years ago. Maybe it was. The man in the wide-brimmed hat invites you to take something with you. You hesitate. Then you accept a single seed, small, dark, warm from his palm. He tells you it's amaranth. You don't need a garden, he says. Just belief. You close your hand around it and nod. It's almost time to leave now. But not yet. You sit at the edge of the chinampa, legs dangling over the side, feet almost brushing the canal's surface. Somewhere in the reeds, a frog sings. A breeze moves through the maize, making it rustle like paper. The sun is higher now. The city looms on the horizon. You can see it, hear it. But here the water still floats, and so does the dream. You linger for a while at the edge of that chinampa, staring into the slow-moving canal as if the water might speak. And maybe it does, just not in words. It gurgles softly against the wooden planks, brushes reeds along your ankles, and reflects back a version of you that looks calm, rooted, like maybe you belong here after all. But it's time to move again. Your guide, who's waited patiently this whole time, taps the side of the canoe with his paddle. Not a rush, just a rhythm. You climb in, and the canoe pushes off once more, drifting further along Xochimilco's winding waters. You're not here to say goodbye just yet. You're here to understand what's left. What's still blooming, surviving, evolving from a world that once thrived in the middle of a lake. The water here is quieter now, away from the tourist music and boat parties. You notice signs nailed to trees in the chinampas. No tire basura. Don't throw trash. Área de Restauración Ecológica. Ecological Restoration Zone. You're entering one of the more protected areas. Zones where nature and culture collaborate rather than compete. You pull alongside a chinampa covered in wild growth. It looks abandoned at first. But a man steps out from behind a row of sunflowers, holding a notebook and wearing a sun-faded university t-shirt. He's a researcher. He waves you over and shows you a hand-drawn map of the canal system, dotted with color-coded plots. Active farms, experimental gardens, dying chinampas, recovered ones. He explains how scientists are working with local farmers to test soil health, measure water purity, even track the return of native birds and amphibians. You spot a small, shimmering shape dart under the water near the canoe. An axolotl, the ancient water creature that once filled these lakes and now exists only in captivity. And here, axolotls. You remember them from earlier, those smiling salamanders in the market. But here, in the wild, they're quieter. Stranger. Sacred, almost. They're survivors like the chinampas, fragile, but clinging to existence with stubby limbs and ancient patience. Historians and ecologists both agree. Chinampas are one of the most sustainable forms of agriculture ever created. Zero waste, continuous harvest, local, resilient, the dream of modern urban farming, but hundreds of years old. The only reason we don't still use it everywhere, we forgot, or rather, we chose to forget. One researcher here tells you that chinampas are part of what some call ancestral technology. Not primitive, not obsolete, but deliberately buried by colonial systems that replaced community agriculture with monocultures, plantations, and imported crops. The chinampas weren't just fields, they were resistance. So naturally, they were erased. Until now. You float past a group of schoolchildren sitting in the shade of a willow. They're painting the chinampas, each of them interpreting the same view in a different color scheme. One paints the maize purple. Another draws Tlaloc peeking out of the clouds. A third adds a spaceship landing between the chili peppers. You smile. The future is weird, but it remembers. Further down the canal, you come to a floating classroom. A wooden platform with shade cloth, white boards, and a small collection of farming tools. A woman teaches a group of teenagers how to layer soil with lake sediment. Not too dry, she says, scooping up a handful. And always plant with intention. You nod. Good advice. For chinampas. For life. One quirky thing about the revival movement: some farms are using QR codes on their produce. Scan the tomatillo, read the story of the family who grew it, learn about the ancient method behind it. Agri-history with a tech twist. TikTok tours of floating farms aren't uncommon either. Some even live stream flower harvests. The gods would be confused, but probably intrigued. Historians still debate how to categorize these modern chinampas. Are they real revivals, simulations, cultural performance? Or are they something new, a hybrid that honors the past but steps into the future? One thing's for sure, they're not done yet. The canoe drifts past a chinampa where volunteers are planting agave between rows of flowers. The agave will help hold the soil, attract pollinators, and serve as a natural fence. Next door, a plot grows medicinal herbs destined for a local cooperative. And just beyond that, someone has built a small solar-powered pump to move water through a dried-up channel. Adaptation. That's the theme. Not restoration. Not nostalgia. Not even survival. Adaptation. You stop for lunch at a cooperative's outdoor table. A woven mat spread across two stumps. Someone hands you a tamal wrapped in amaranth leaves and filled with squash blossoms, corn, and chili. Tastes like sunlight and smoke. Like earth and memory. Like the lake is feeding you directly. You ask the farmer sitting beside you how long he's been working this chinampa. For years, he says. But it belongs to my great-great-grandmother. You ask if he thinks the chinampas will still be here in another 100 years. He shrugs. If we're lucky. If we fight for them. You eat in silence after that. Thinking. Feeling the soft wind ripple over the canal. Watching a duck trail her ducklings between the lily pads. Hearing the children behind you recite names of native plants like spells. Episode. Wazental. Xochitl. You realize, then, that this is what legacy feels like. Not a monument. Not a statue. Just a floating patch of dirt and water that someone refuses to give up on. And now, you're part of that refusal too. Your canoe glides onward, tracing a looping path through the narrowest canals of Xochimilco. Here, the water is glassy. Still, the only ripples are those left by passing ducks or the lazy dip of your guide's paddle. You feel the journey winding down, but not fading. Not yet. There's one last chapter to drift through. What we forgot, and what we kept, even without realizing it. You pass a chinampa where tall rows of maize rustle in the breeze. It's like watching memory grow. The sound is ancient. The smell is familiar. You wonder how much of what we call modern farming owes its roots to this place. A lot, actually. You float past another garden where someone's experimenting with vertical farming. PVC pipes, aquaponics, and hydroponic trays hang over the water. It looks futuristic, tech-heavy. But your guide chuckles softly and taps his paddle on the edge of a chinampa. Already did that, he says. 600 years ago. Historians agree that the Aztec chinampa system was essentially early hydroponics. Nutrient-rich lake water-feeding plants through their roots without the need for dry land. But it wasn't just the technique that made it revolutionary. It was the integration of soil, water, waste, air, labor, community, and spirituality. You see glimpses of it everywhere now. In the raised beds of rooftop gardens. In community compost projects. In the renewed popularity of companion planting, where crops are placed together for mutual benefit, like the three sisters, maize, beans, and squash. You spot a compost pile on one chinampa, neatly arranged and steaming slightly in the sun. That smell, rich, damp, oddly comforting. Lingers as you drift past a sign that reads, Soberania Alimentaria, food sovereignty. That's what it's about now. Not just nostalgia or boutique farming for curious tourists, but reclaiming control of food, of culture, of memory. You pass a wall mural painted on the side of a modern building. A woman in traditional dress harvesting amaranth, surrounded by skulls, flowers, and floating gardens. The caption reads, Semilas no mueren. Seeds don't die, and they haven't. Amaranth. Chia. Episode. These so-called superfoods have made their way into global cuisine. They're sold in health food stores and blended into smoothies, marketed with bright labels and claims of ancient power. But here, they never left. They've always been growing. And the idea of the chinampa? The sprouting again, too. In New York, people are growing lettuce in floating rafts on the Hudson. In Vietnam, families build rice paddies that rise with seasonal floods. In Bangladesh, floating farms with bamboo frames hold tomatoes and gourds. These aren't copies. They're echoes. Proof that when land fails, water remembers how to hold us. Historians still argue whether modern agriculture can truly scale the chinampa model. The pressures of climate, urbanization, and economics are immense. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe it's not about scale. Maybe it's about principles. Because the chinampas weren't just a way to grow food. They were a way to live. To be in conversation with the land instead of in combat. To feed not just the body, but the ritual, the community, the soul. You reach a quiet stretch of canal again, narrow, overhung with trees. The sun filters through in broken shafts. The light dances on the water like silver fish. Your guide stops paddling. The canoe drifts. You pass one last chinampa. It's small, humble. A few rows of maize, a basket of herbs, a bench under a fig tree. A grandmother sits there, shelling beans into her lap. She hums to herself. Her grandson sleeps in a sling on her back. It's just another day. Nothing special. And yet you can't look away. This is what the Aztecs were protecting. What they were planting for. What they were praying over. Not empire. Not gold. But this. A moment. A meal. A child carried into the future. You think of all the empires that rose and fell. Of the monuments they left behind. Marble, steel, empty stadiums, roads to nowhere. And then you look at this tiny floating garden, this soft patch of living soil, and realize which one endured. This isn't about preserving the past in amber. It's about letting it grow forward. Like a vine that finds light no matter how many stones it's buried beneath. You turn toward your guide. He doesn't speak. He just dips the paddle once more, gently steering the canoe away. You drift in silence, your hand trailing in the water. Behind you, the chinampa disappears into the reeds. But not from memory, because you'll carry it now. Every row of maize, every whisper of water, every petal that floated through the moonlight. This wasn't a history lesson. It was a planting, and something inside you has taken root. You don't know when the shift happens exactly, but it does. The light softens again. The breeze cools. The water grows slower, almost lazy in its motion. And even your guide, who has paddled without pause for what feels like days and centuries all at once, now lets the oar rest across his lap. The canoe drifts on its own. This is the last stretch. The final ripple. Around you, the chinampas are thinner now. Fewer crops. Fewer people. Just open water broken by tufts of reeds, tree roots curling into the canal like fingers, and the shadows of willows stretching long across the surface. You hear a dove calling from somewhere. The hush is thick enough to wrap around your shoulders. You pass what looks like an old garden, half sunken, the edge of its soil crumbling gently into the canal. No one tends it now, but there are flowers, volunteers they're called, blossoms that sprout from wind-borne seeds, from memories left in the dirt. A marigold blooms defiantly near the center. Another inch and it would have drowned. But not today. This chinampa doesn't need a caretaker anymore. It is the caretaker, a monument of mud, a cathedral of compost. You rest your hand on the side of the canoe. The wood is warm from the sun. The lake breathes beneath you, steady and slow, like the lungs of the earth rising and falling beneath your palm. You realize this whole journey has been circular, no beginning, no end. Just loops of water, loops of story. Maize becomes soil. Soil becomes flower. Flower becomes offering. Offering becomes seed. And you've been floating in all of it. Historians still argue whether the Aztec world truly vanished, or whether it simply shifted forms, became something quieter, more disguised, hidden in the folds of modern life. Some say it's alive in language, in cuisine, in festivals. Others say it pulses through resistance movements, grassroots farms, whispered prayers. But here, now, floating in this breathless stillness, you realize the truth is more personal. It's alive because you've seen it, and you've remembered it. You close your eyes, just for a moment. You hear the soft plip of a fish breaking the surface, the faint rustle of reeds, the slow creak of the canoe as it nudges a curve in the canal. And then nothing. Not silence exactly, but something deeper. Stillness. Peace. The kind of quiet that says, you made it. You open your eyes again. The lake opens before you. Flat. Calm. A mirror. The chinampas recede behind you. Not gone. Not forgotten. Just folded back into the fabric of the lake. The sky stretches above in pale blue. A single hawk circles lazily overhead. You realize you've floated from the past into the present, and maybe even a little bit into the future. And through it all, the gardens never stopped growing. You run your thumb across the amaranth seeds still tucked in your palm. It's light, but it's enough. Wind down, 300 words. And now, the water slows, the light fades, the chinampas dissolve into a watercolor of soft greens and silvers. No more canoes, no more paddling. Just you and the quiet. Let it hold you. Feel the last warmth of the sun on your skin as the lake rocks gently beneath. The air is cool now, touched by the kind of breeze that lifts only at dusk. The kind that makes the leaves whisper secrets you'll never fully understand. Let them whisper. You don't need to respond. You've traveled through centuries tonight. You've watched cities rise on mud and reed. You've tasted the scent of maize at dawn and heard the prayers woven into flower garlands. You've stood in silence beneath sacred trees, and you've floated past shadows of temples and ghosts of trade. But now, you don't need to remember every fact. You don't need to carry it all. Just keep the feeling. That soft weight of mud underfoot. That shimmer of petals on water. That quiet, resilient hum of a world that refuses to disappear. Let it stay with you, not as noise, but as stillness. The gardens are floating still somewhere, and maybe in your dreams tonight you'll return to them. One petal at a time, one paddle at a time, one breath at a time.